Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Super excited to unpack this topic. I think it's super interesting to unpack, of course, the founder's journey in its entirety. There's lots of commentary on what it means to start a company, what it means to fundraise. But for this panel, the whole idea was to take it one step backwards. And if you're a founder or you're not yet a founder and you have this crazy big idea and you're not really sure even how to grasp it, maybe it's a vision that's even too big for you to describe. What is that process? How do you go from 0 to 1? You're laying in bed one day and you decide to just start a company. What does that look like? So that's what we're going to discuss today. But Shamal, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself and
Happy to,
a little bit about your background?
Nice to meet everyone. I'm Shamal. I work for a company called PhysicsX. So we build AI for engineers, and we compress physics simulation down from months to seconds. We work with a number of leading enterprises across a range of sectors, from manufacturing to aerospace and defense, to automotive, to mining and materials. We're a Series B business, so we've raised over $160 million, working with leading investors from Atomico, General Catalyst, and NVIDIA. I build partnerships, and my role is partnerships, and I build partnerships across a range of different players, but kind of two focus areas. One is working with a set of hyperscalers, including players like NVIDIA, just to understand how can we work with some of the hyperscalers to bring the technology and the product into the hands of as many engineers as possible so they can test it. And then secondly, working with increasingly a number of players who we've realized over time are players that are serving our customers in different ways. They could be geometry players, for example, where we build partnerships with them so we can start to think about newer go-to-market partnerships. Been with the company for 3 months. Background, I was at Atomico for 4 years before that, so VC fund in London. Built out the BD and partnerships, so business development and partnerships team. Prior to that, I was at McKinsey and started my career in film and TV. So I used to sell DVDs and Blu-rays to retail stores in the UK. That was my first job. So nice to meet you.
I love it. Talk about high technology. So one of the reasons I was really excited to talk with PhysicsX about this topic is because, as you heard, I think everybody would agree that this is a big idea, right? You're interacting with a lot of different types of customers, but also a lot of different types of partners as well. So let's unpack that a little bit. How does a founder go from having that big vision to understanding what that means to break that vision down into identifying what that product is, and then breaking down that product to understand what that startup is, going from big vision to small company?
I think it's really interesting. So I think from Atomico days, you get to see a range of founders from the sort of very early stage who have built into seed and built through A, and then you see the sort of latter stages of how that plays out. So I think there's sort of a succession of conversations that plays out as I think about some of those founders. So I think there's, first, even before you get to product and customer, there's a really honest gut check that I think everyone does. And I think it is talking not to the investor, not talking to a customer, not thinking about your product, but talking to the people that will be the most honest with you, your friends, your partner, your kids, just to try and figure out, is this the right time to go start a company? Because you might want to have a kid. You might have an issue in your relationship. You may be having a mental breakdown and not realize it. And so there's a bunch of stuff going on, I think, both internally and externally, that you have to completely validate honestly with people that you trust and that will give you an honest opinion before you even begin the process of trying to build a company. I think then what happens, and I think the steps where I've seen a lot of friends, but also founders at Atomico go through, is there's the process of sort of asking really thoughtful questions. So I think at this point you're going to potential customers or potential buyers and just trying to understand, is the thing that I am trying to sell something that is sticky? And is it sticky with more than one person? And I think the kind of real proof point is when you're going into some of those conversations, so my role at Atomico was to introduce founders to some of their first enterprise customers. It was not to go and sell. It was to try and understand what are the questions that you are facing as an enterprise leader. It could be a CFO, it could be a CTO, it could be a VP of engineering. And just to try and get a feel for, is what I am selling a pain point that genuinely exists? Or do I find myself constantly going in there and just selling at them and saying, this tool is amazing and this is the best? Because if you do the latter, it won't work. And I think if you can kind of use the sort of process to just understand, is this the right product to build out, you will build out product market fit. I think step 3 is then going to some healthy skeptics. So I think what early stage seed investors, and quite frankly, a lot of the cloud providers are really good at, is getting a feel for the market. And they'll help you to understand, as you think about building a company for the first time, what are some of the proof points that you need to think about as you build both product and start to build a product vision over the next 12 months, or even thinking about what are the right 1 or 2 hires that you're trying to make, and everything from like I need to get a visa to get someone to work in a specific country, or to try and understand, look, I'm trying to land this particular logo. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Do you know anyone in your network that can help me? So I think there's sort of a 3-stage validation process, but I think the founders that I've seen that do that well do that both very thoughtfully. They ask incredibly good questions, and they listen, and they're not trying to tell people what to do. I think that's the best quality in any founder. But I think also they move at incredible execution speed. And so some of the best founders I've met don't sleep a lot. And I think you heard that earlier. It was kind of the last panel. I think the founder said it's like eating glass. And I think that is true for lots of founders. And I think the ones that do it can stomach a lot of glass. I think that's probably the best analogy.
I don't know if I love the analogy. But so I think we're kind of finding a center of gravity here in terms of like getting from 0 to 1 on that idea. And it's validation and asking thoughtful questions, not only of your friends and family, but also of potential customers. How does one go about identifying like, okay, these are like the 5 questions that I need to ask to kind of validate what the market size, the pain point, and if customers are even going to love this idea?
I think speak to as many people as you can and use Claude. I think they're the kind of 2 things I would be doing. So I think there's sort of on one side where so the Atomico as a fund was amazing because it was built by a founder. And so instantly, the second you go into the fund, you realize it's in the DNA of everyone that operates. You genuinely care about the companies. And it's actually come through more since I've left than since I was there. But as part of the offering at Atomico, there was something called the post-investment platform team called Growth Acceleration. And so that was the team that I was in. And each person in that team had a specific function. And so I spent 100% of my time talking to execs inside large companies, be that at Google, be that at Barclays Bank, be that at LVMH, and just trying to understand what do they look for when they're trying to buy products for the first time. And so what you do get from that, I think, is really good pattern recognition. And so therefore, if you're a founder and you can find people like that, or you can find people in industry, I think what you can quickly start to assimilate is, what is this product that I'm selling? Is this going to work? And then you start to do sort of more granular things. So in go-to-market, for example, a lot of the conversations I had with early stage founders was them saying, I really want to sell to Goldman Sachs, or I really want to sell to McKinsey. Can I do that? And the answer was probably not yet, because you're really new to this. And so the conversation became, let's think about how you structure your pipeline. What is it that you're looking at? Where does McKinsey sit in the sort of 100 companies that you may want to sell to? And why do you think they should be buying your product today? Because the one thing you will realize, the bigger the company gets, the more people need to validate the product in order to actually make a decision to buy. And the cycle is much longer. So I think lots of you will realize that enterprise sales cycles will take well over 12 months. And so a lot of your time in the early days will be spent talking to lots of potential buyers and champions about, is this the right product? Are we the right market? If you go into a regulated industry like fintech, you'll meet people like the CTO of HSBC who said to me, I find it really frustrating when people come to me and they just email me and say, I want to sell a product to you. Because she said, look, within a bank, we're a regulated business. We operate in hundreds of countries. So therefore, to have got your way to my inbox and for me to take it seriously, I would have expected you to talk to at least 20 people inside my company in 3 different countries just to understand, is this product sticky or not? And I think the kind of flip is true, which is if you can go to some sort of smaller SME businesses, then you kind of more quickly can get a product test. The decision to buy is much quicker, and that sort of helps to validate it. So there's not sort of, I don't think there's the right formula in terms of if you start downstream and go up, but I think there's a real validation in talking to as many people as you can to kind of understand what to do.
So I want to unpack that a little more and get to some exactly kind of like practical advice, because that works really well if you're somebody who has the email address for the CEO of HSBC or knows people at Goldman Sachs. But if you take a step back from there and you say, let's say you're a founder, let's say you're just coming out of university or you're in university, you don't have connections to investors, you don't have connections to these major enterprises. Is that a complete limiter, a showstopper, or how do you begin that journey without those types of connections?
I think just start talking to friends and family, because I think what you do quickly get a sense for is, in all the founder situations we've met, you either come with experience or you come with a ton of passion, and I think they both have to kind of fuse together in order to build a brilliant company, and so therefore age is irrelevant in lots of ways. But I think what does happen is if I were coming out of university now, I'd be thinking about what are the sort of 2 or 3 areas that I really want to focus on and make a change and difference to in the world. And then within one of those 2 industries, I try and go deeper to understand what's happening. You can use a bunch of the sort of basic GPT tools out there just to kind of do some research and understand what are some of the challenges facing those industries. My background is in media. One of the biggest challenges is probably one of the most disrupted sectors in the world. And in the media industry, what's been happening recently is inevitably AI has gone and shifted itself into content production. So there's a ton of new businesses like Wonder where they've come into the market and they've said, look, what we want to try and do is flip the way content production is done. And so I think to kind of go through the research phase, I don't think requires a ton of like expertise and connections. I think as you start to go into the building a prototype for the first time, I think what then can be helpful is starting to think about different ways that you can leverage social media tools to kind of get some of the outreach. So some of the things that I used to do at Atomico was to LinkedIn cold message a bunch of people, and it was to try and just get some interesting insight into their perspective on the industry and use both the second connections and third connections, because normally someone knows someone inside an industry. So I think it's kind of getting to people is actually less hard than I think people realize, but having something useful to say and convincing them to continue that conversation is the most difficult thing on earth.
Yeah, so I think, and I heard something recently from a founder who said, like during the process, probably 15% of the people you talk to are just going to call you stupid. Like straight up are going to say that your idea is dumb and this is a really bad idea. From a founder perspective, how do you sort of like gauge feedback like that? How do you sort of like overcome those barriers of somebody telling you, hey, this straight up sucks, and then having a few other people tell you, hey, this is a cool idea? How do you measure that?
I think it's a combination of you trust data and you follow your gut. And I don't think there's a clean formula, but I think in all of the scenarios where companies have gone, where I've seen sort of companies go well and less well, I think there's learnings in all of it, right? And so if I think about sort of founders I've spoken to in the past, one founder was building a company and for ages had said, look, I'm going to serve like 10 different sectors all at the same time, seed stage, and said, I'm just going to go and meet some of the most senior execs inside some of the biggest companies. And for ages, the sort of commentary back from me and a bunch of people was, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, because you're spreading yourself quite thin in terms of sector coverage, and you need to understand in a little bit of detail what each of the sectors cover. But I think also if you're going into really senior rooms with really large companies very quickly, if that doesn't work, that's it, you get one shot. And so I think kind of always rely on the data. I think a second story, I remember an early stage founder who had said to me, I wish I had fired 2 people 12 months ago. It would have saved my business. And so I think there's a ton of learning just in using data as a way to guide you. And so if you miss ARR, you're using data to kind of pivot quickly, or you are at least trusting your gut as a way to say something feels slightly off. If a couple of customers have ghosted you, there's potentially a sign that the pain point doesn't exist or that you're not quite there yet. And so therefore refining either the story that you're telling to customers is really helpful. And I think kind of continuing to talk to the people that you trust around you that will at least gut check you and make sure that you're not going in completely the wrong direction is a really helpful thing to do.
Okay, so missing revenue or missing ARR, having customers who ghost you, you kind of get a different gut feeling. What are some other signals that would indicate like, okay, I should probably pivot, or it's time to kind of think about, really making a major change?
So I think there are 2 sets of challenges. One are personal, which I think we talked about at the beginning. I think more are professional. So I think on the professional side, I think there's a couple of different things to think about. So runway will dictate, I think, a lot of how you think about running your company. But I think as you think about beyond revenue, there's a couple of things at the earlier stage I think we've definitely seen in the past. I think one is starting to think about the talent that you are trying to build your team out on. So as you think about building companies, you're going to need to hire lots of different people. And on sort of reflection in talking to some of the earlier stage founders, hiring is the most difficult thing to do. People are really complicated, and getting good people to join your company is one of the hardest things ever. And I know lots of friends of mine and lots of founders at Atomico that have made mishires, and they can go wrong because you leave the person in the company for too long, or you didn't diligence them properly when they were coming in. And it's the most difficult thing to do because pivoting a human in or out of a business is just really hard, and it's painful, both emotionally but professionally. And so I think kind of beyond the revenue, one is definitely people and trying to get a real good sense for how you think about the types of people that you're bringing into your company. I think the third thing in Europe, particularly that people don't talk about, is storytelling. And so one of the challenges when you compare, and it comes up a lot in panels, and I'm sure you've seen it, is when you compare sort of European founders to US founders really excel at telling incredible stories. And that's often the reason why they get great funding. And it's a reason that they can sell to a ton of customers really fast. And I think it's something that in Europe, not even we struggle, but I think it's something that we find historically less comfortable to do. And so I think what does happen is if you can continue to refine your storytelling capability, you have an even better message to send to your customers. You understand that you're talking about their pain point first, not your product first. And you can start to think about ways to talk to external media when that moment starts to arrive.
Any tips on being a good storyteller?
I think watch lots of podcasts on YouTube. I think you can crowdsource a lot of this quite quickly. I think then there's a bunch of freelancers that you can connect with, and I'm happy to kind of connect people up. But I think it's definitely a process, and I think that's the most underrated thing that people don't talk about, because particularly as you're going into raise bigger and bigger rounds, and as you're starting to think about building and attracting people into your company and building your own customer base outwards, you have to be a really crisp storyteller. And I think that is one of the most difficult things to do as a founder, particularly if you've come from a technical background. But I think it's something that can make or break your sort of first couple of years.
So I want to go back to kind of something that we covered in the beginning, and we've touched upon it a couple times, right? Founders are not sleeping, they're eating glass, and we talked about sort of making sure that your life is in order before you kind of go on this venture. But not all of us are able to operate on 4 hours. Not all of us have perfect lives that we're able to make the plunge. Kind of, what's your advice on identifying when the right time is in your life to make that shot?
I think when you... God, that's a hard question. I think when the passion to build outweighs all of the reasons not to, and that feels like a coward's answer, but I think that it feels like the right answer, because every founder I've met, when you're not talking with an investor lens on, they always feel they're going too early. They'll always talk about the insecurity of building. They'll always talk about the things that they're not going to be able to do because they're going to take a pay cut, because they're not going to be able to do the sort of lifestyle things they want to do, and yet they still do it. And I think it's because they've spent a ton of time and reflection just trying to get to a place where they feel so passionate that actually what they're building will change, I think, not even their end customers, but I think sort of other people. And so one of the founders that I've loved from Atomico was a guy called Jordi. Jordi built a HR tech platform called Factorial. And he's been building businesses for over 20 years. And he's based in Barcelona. He'd been building in the Valley as well, and he came back to Europe. And when you talk to him, his company's hit over 100 million of ARR. It's an amazing stat. And yet he won't talk about that. He'll talk about the fact that he's building a world-class company in Barcelona. And what that means in practice is there are tons of people that have joined his company and just wanted to stay a couple of years. They were young. They wanted to build their own company over time. And they learned the work ethic of Jordi and are starting to build their own next generation of businesses. So when you do this right, you build an entire ecosystem. And I think that's kind of the best thing about being in entrepreneurship right now, that I think you're building something that is much bigger than yourself. And I think those are the types of missions to kind of chase.
Love that. I'm an ecosystem guy, always been an ecosystem guy, and we're at a festival or a conference right now that is a celebration of an ancient festival centered around community and around ecosystem. So what is your advice now to founders? How do they leverage their ecosystem? How can they leverage their community? It can be tough to be. It can be very lonely to be a founder. Like
100%.
How do they grapple with that, and how do they leverage communities like this one?
Do this more. I think you guys are, like, everyone in this room is doing exactly the right thing, which is you're coming with a sense to try and learn, to try and meet new people, to potentially find new customers, to potentially hire some people. And I think these are all the right reasons to come to things like this. I think a lot of my job at Atomico, and even now, is kind of trying to find new ways to network with people. And I think it's the most underrated skill ever, because it will give you access to both, learning new insights about how the world is moving is helpful. Learning how your customers are thinking is helpful. Trying to figure out ways as you're building out a new function in your team, or as you're starting to build a new part of your product out, is a helpful thing to do. Some of the sort of fun events I remember going to in the past, and this is true both on the sort of larger enterprise side and on the SME side, the same thing happens when you bring really senior execs of large companies in a room over dinner, and you bring founders or people that work in companies around over dinner. They'll always talk about the fact that it's actually quite hard, because the challenges you go through are so specific to you within your company, and you're the only person doing that job in your company, that it's actually quite hard to find other people that you can connect with, that you can learn from, and that's the best way to meet. So I would do nothing other than encourage you to go to more conferences, to spam more people on LinkedIn in a thoughtful way, and find reasons to keep connecting, because it's the best way to do it. And I think being human is about being connected.
I love it. Spamming more people in a thoughtful way. We've just got a couple seconds left, Shamal. What's your last advice for founders who are grappling with a big vision and trying to break it down and be successful with it?
So I love podcasts, I think I was saying earlier, and there was a podcast I listened to over Christmas between a guy called Chris Williamson and Stephen Bartlett, so both are British, so I selfishly love that. And Chris Williamson said something like, if your life was a movie and the audience was watching, what's the one thing they'd be screaming at you right now? And I think I love that quote because it is a burning passion quote that says, if you have an idea, and if your life was a film, do you think the audience would tell you to build it or not build it? And that answer will probably tell you whether to build a company or not. And I suspect the answer is yes.
Boy, I love it. Trust your gut. Thank you, Shamal, so much, and thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.